Learn how to build a successful Chamber of Commerce. Winning with Doug Griffiths, CEO of the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce. On today's episode of the Executive Wins Podcast. Welcome to the Executive Wins Podcast, where senior leaders share their biggest wins so you can get inspired and grow your business. Here's your host, Gordon Shepherd. Welcome to the Executive Wins Podcast, where senior leaders share their biggest wins so that you can get inspired and grow your business. I'm your host, Gordon Shepherd. And to kick off the show, I want to share a leadership lesson that I learned from Carolyn Stern, the CEO of EI Experience, on episode 55. She said that leaders, like all people, leave an emotional wake wherever they go. As in, just like a motorboat that goes by, the way a leader is feeling affects everybody in the office. Well, that's why she has dedicated her work to helping leaders learn emotional intelligence so they can be self-aware, know when to say what, and also to realize that if they choose the right type of emotional wake they want to leave behind, then they can make their teams more successful. And that's just one of hundreds of leadership lessons you'll learn when you listen to past episodes on the Executive Wins Podcast. Another reason to listen? Well, the Executive Wins Podcast won the Best New Podcast Award in the Quill Podcasting Awards in its first year of production. And thanks to you, the Executive Wins Podcast has more than 43,000 views on YouTube and over 22,000 minutes of watch time, along with having over 1,800 downloads on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen. Featuring mission-driven leaders sharing their biggest wins, so that you can get inspired and grow your business. That's what you get on the Executive Wins Podcast. On today's episode, you'll learn how to build a successful Chamber of Commerce. Winning with Doug Griffiths, CEO of the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce. I also want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by our leadership team workshop called Aligned to Win. How to build a high-performance leadership team. In this workshop, leaders learn a proven system to help them consistently make better decisions so they can achieve their goals. It's called the Anatomy of a Win, to help everyone on your team understand the strategy, work plan, people, operations, and results behind every major project that you take on. Imagine what would happen if every leader on your team is fully aligned and working hard to turn your goals into results. So if you want to break down silos and build a high-performance leadership team that actually makes your company more profitable, then get in touch with me directly at gord@executivewins.com. That's gord@executivewins.com. And now on to today's show. We are lucky to be joined by Doug Griffiths, CEO of the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce, an organization that advocates and provides innovative services for the business community while helping its members to grow their profitability. You can learn about their work at edmontonchamber.com. That's edmontonchamber.com. On this episode, you'll learn how Doug successfully led a complete overhaul of the Edmonton Chamber in just 2 years. From building a team of rock stars to regaining the trust of all 3 levels of government, to delivering sold-out events and more. The Edmonton Chamber of Commerce is back big time because of the efforts of Doug and his team. You'll also hear about how Doug applied the values and techniques from his international best-selling book titled 13 Ways to Kill Your Community. This episode is a masterclass in resilience, humility, and finding a way to rebuild a brand into an economic driver for Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and the world. I also want to remind you that this interview follows a specific format that I created called the Anatomy of a Win to help you learn the strategy, work plan, people, operations, and results behind every business win that you hear on this show. I really do hope that you can use this approach to reach your next business milestone. And now here's Doug Griffiths with his executive win. Doug, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on the show. I'm really excited about this.
Well, I'm so glad you're excited because I'm maybe way more excited than that because it is so wonderful to have a chance for a leader who has put out so many things over so many decades and now arriving with the win that you're going to share here today, maybe being a bit of a culmination of some of that work in terms of getting some more wonderful things to happen in the community. But you've served in government levels, you've served in nonprofit levels, you've run successfully your own business as well. I mean, there's just so many things to go on and on about, but maybe there's a few people that don't know who you are. So if you had to introduce yourself, what would you say?
Oh, wow. My name is Doug Griffiths. I am currently the president and CEO of the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce. I'm also president and CEO of my own company, 13 Ways, which is based on an international best-selling book that I wrote, famous around North America. I did spend 13 years in provincial politics and served in a few cabinet portfolios, but I've been through rehab and I'm fully recovered. So
Fully recovered from the political realm. And
yeah.
you know, what's fun, I'm going to get into the Chamber of Commerce piece soon, but the 13 ways, how did that kind of get started? And if you had to explain that philosophy or the drivers behind it for people that didn't know, please let us know a little bit about that because it'll help us a lot.
Yeah, well, it's the 13 Ways started. It's what got me into politics. I was worried about the future of our communities. So I lived in one, I ranched in a community, and I taught in another one, and they were all about 30 miles from each other, and they were all dying. And I shot my mouth off about the need for a rural community development strategy, and our MLA resigned, and everyone said I should run, so I did. I campaigned on the need for a rural development strategy. I got elected, and the premier of the day, Ralph Klein, and the deputy premier, Shirley McCullin, called me into the office and said, write a rural development strategy. So I did. I wrote a report that it covered health, education, community infrastructure, economic development, youth, seniors, tourism, arts and culture, water, wastewater infrastructure, and housing. And everybody was excited about it. And then I watched people do the exact opposite of what we knew they needed to do. And that was my second epiphany. The first one came when I was a junior high teacher. I'd talk to high school students about how to be successful. And it was pretty straightforward. Study hard, don't do drugs, marry someone nice, and you'll have a good life. And they all looked at me like, yeah, I know. But no one changed their behavior. So one day I went to the classroom and said, I want you to describe to me what it would look like if you're 40 years old and you have ruined your life. So they'd say things like, I'd be a drug addict, I'd be in jail, I'd fail out of school. And then I'd say, great, let's pretend that's your goal. You want to be 40 and you failed. How would you start today? Let's say you want to become a drug addict. What would you do today? And somebody would put up their hand because they were high school students, and they'd say, well, if I wanted to eventually become a 40-year-old drug addict, I'd start by smoking a joint after school. And two kids would blush because that's what they did yesterday. And I mean, we even know that it's alcohol that's a gateway drug, not marijuana, but it doesn't matter. They started to think about the choices they were making today. And then I just applied that to communities 20 years later. I'd talk to them about what they needed to do to be successful. They would do the opposite, just like the high school students would. And so I started to make this list of things I watched communities do to sabotage their own success, and it became 13 Ways. And the first edition became a national bestseller, and the second edition became an international bestseller, and I built my whole company around it.
Well, thank you so much for putting in the reps. You know what I mean? From an earnest point of view, like there's an honest, like, I want to do better. I'm going to jump into the political realm and find out, wait a second, which actually was informative. Thanks for surviving the political realm, whatever you needed to do. And then you get into finding these 13 ways, and I've seen you present and how impactful, that presentation alone is, let alone, I'm sure, the fundamental work that you do to help so many communities. Like you're saying, I'm going to say globally now. I mean, this bestseller is pretty crazy in terms of
It's true. Actually, I'm going to New Zealand in September.
Yeah. And so isn't that nice that you put in the time and those decades that it takes to then legitimately have, your thought process down in the 13 ways. And then there's a bit of a translation for coming into this role as CEO at the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce, because when you arrived, maybe they were their 40-year-old selves. Is that fair in terms of where they were at? And then there's been a process there that you've taken them through over the last couple of years. Is that fair?
Yeah. There's I think a lot of chambers are facing it, and a lot of organizations are facing it. That what we're going to continue doing what we've always done. I mean, even though the world's changed dramatically, and just to put it into context, I ask people how if how the 80s were, and everyone reminisces, they talk about the music, they talk about the time, and then you point out to them that's 45 years ago. That's 45 years ago to get back to 1981. And they're like, oh, yeah, I guess things have changed, but we forget. And then we still do things the way we did in 1981. And that's just a consequence of the way human beings are. It's not a bad thing. Chambers are no different. And then, I think the chamber fell on some pretty hard times, internally with some issues. And so I remember one of the board members when I got hired saying it's a bit of a fixer-upper, and I kind of snickered about 6 months later and said, "I think you meant a tear down," but we fixed it up, and it's been a long 2 years, but it's been worth every minute of investment.
Well, that leads me to my first question. If you had to describe your biggest win, or one of them anyway, because you have so many, if you had to describe your biggest win, what would that win be, and how would you describe it?
Well, yeah, there's a lot I would say, but right now in this context, 2 years and 4 months into rebuilding the chamber, we just had an all teams meeting, and this is a big win for me. I've worked with hundreds of communities and chambers of commerce and stuff around North America, helping them find that pathway to success. Some have success, some don't. The hard part about that is that you get to go help them a bit, and then you sort of got to launch them, and some of them don't always follow through. And so I keep following up with them. But here at the chamber, this was led by me, and this was my initiative and my impetus to help fix it. And so I put to work everything I've said that every other organization should do. And if anything, I think it's been a reconfirmation that the strategies that I recommend people use and the ones I help them with focus and dedication, demonstrate just what's possible. I mean, I think we're back to being the third largest chamber of commerce in the country again. And when I got the job, quite a few people said, I didn't even know we still had a chamber of commerce. So and now everyone recognizes what the chamber's doing. That has been a really telling and a big win that I'm really proud of.
Well, and I'm a member. I joined a couple of years ago because of what you were doing. Like, you know what I mean? And I can't tell you all the details that are behind the 2 years and 4 months that you were doing. What I could say was the vibe was different. And I felt that if I made that investment, that I was going to get something from it. And I really have. I've really enjoyed it, say, from a member point of view, which has been great. But the fixer-upper had some fixer-upper things to do, and we're going to kind of jump into that maybe, and then leading to the success point that you're talking about now. So anytime I hear about a win, I always like to talk about what I call the anatomy of a win. So what is the strategy, work plan, people, operations, and results behind the win? Strategically, you arrive 2 years ago, you're talking to those board members, you're thinking about what's going to happen. When you look at the vision, mission, values, goals that you had in place at that time, what was the sort of strategic highlights getting on that journey, and how have those evolved?
Oh, you know what? I would say it's actually evolved constantly. The very first year here, I'm still fond of telling the story about getting into my office on my very first day, and there was a broken desk on the floor, and I tried to put it back together before one person sort of popped their head in laughing at me and said, "Oh, it won't go back together. They took it apart to put in new carpet before you got here, and it won't go back together." So I hauled it all downstairs and I threw it all out, and then I went down into the basement and I found this little bistro table and set it up in the corner with a wooden chair and worked on my own computer, because for almost 3 months I couldn't get the tech company to call me back to even get me set up using a laptop or to get access to the chair. And then I found out, when they finally did call me back, I had to let them go, and I hired a new company, and they checked our server and said, "Oh, it's 2 years out of date. You're really lucky it didn't go down. You would have lost all the membership data, every bit of." I was like, whoa. So whatever I planned on doing, the first year was just, sort of fixing and repairing and tidying up. And then the second year really was building the team, pulling in the right people, making sure that the synergies were there. We have such a talented group of people. It's absolutely remarkable what they've done. And so they each built their own departments again and had to rebuild them from scratch. I mean, right from having to rebuild the website, rebuild the brand, rebuild the story. So it was I did a strategic plan last year. We had to do for 3 years. We had to do a whole new strategic plan again this year, because everything keeps evolving, and now we have new opportunities, and so It's been like it feels like every week is a new iteration and evolution of what's
So
happening.
new iteration, but underneath this, you've foundationally got a couple of decades of thinking, writing the book. You've got your experience. You know, what I mean, that's been a through line, I'm going to say, from the values side or vision side. Is that fair in this story?
Yeah, the values, the organizational values, and what you're looking for, is so foundational to everything that you do. I know that, there's that old Drucker saying, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast," and then there's the new one that culture and strategy should eat breakfast together. Um, but finding the right people, I actually when we hired. I mean, we looked through resumes and looked for talent too, but the first thing I looked for was the mindset. You've got to find people who aren't just coming in to take on a job, but are coming in recognizing they get to be part of something that's going to be bigger and grow around them. And that's a very unique lots of people, and I don't mean this meant not meant to be offensive at all, but lots of people are looking for a good job. I wanted people that were looking for to build a good job within a great organization and achieve something fantastic. And that's why I think everybody tells us our team is just stellar. They keep saying you can't hire more rock stars, but we keep hiring more rock stars.
I love it. The Drucker one for me is if culture eats strategy for breakfast, then wins eat losses for lunch. That's what
Yeah,
I've added into my extension for the
I
work that
like
I
that.
do because I help people focus on the wins. And it's a funny perspective because, again, like you were saying earlier, there's a tendency to the negative or the not responding. And the wins perspective has been really interesting to help people tell those stories and then dig in with this framework that we're working through right now. Got some
Yeah.
strategic highlights. We get a good feel for what you're doing in your work. The next step for me is a work plan. So we heard 2 years and 4 months in this journey. So there's,
Yeah.
that's sort of the timeline. And,
That's to today.
that's so if we look at the timeline, was it easy sailing along the way? Was it peaks and valleys? How would you describe sort of the timeline and what happened?
God, no. No, it was not. You know what? I think that's part of, is why I like your podcast. It's part of the really important part of the wins is to recognize that, the wins look like you caught the ball in the end zone and you scored a touchdown. The wins are how you got through the broken leg and how you got through the concussion and how you got through that bad season where you missed a bunch of catches and how then you had a quarterback that couldn't, you didn't line up when you ran the wrong play. Like it's the old Michael Jordan, the reason why I scored so many baskets was because, 9 out of 10 shots I missed, I just kept taking more and more shots. I know that that's not exactly the way it goes, but that's,
Well, and you can hear it when we talk about the peaks and the valleys. There's one moment when you think you're arriving on your first day of work and you think you're going to have a desk. And
yeah,
maybe you think the computer files are going to be there, and that you know what I mean. Like, and
yeah.
there's a resilience that we need to then hold up those values that you knew you were going to get to, and that's funny too about timelines and leadership. Like, do you think it's going to happen in 90 days, and here we are 2 years and 4 months later with an iterative strategy based on geopolitical realities, budget
Yeah.
realities, provincial, federal, local. I mean, there's all kinds of impacts in your very fluid world that kind of get us to this win at this time. Is that fair?
Yeah, those are the big ones that we get to deal with now, right? The tariff war and the conversations about separation and things that impact, what you're doing, the political and geopolitical stuff. But it's important to remember when you're gonna. I hired a bunch of people, and one or two didn't work out, and you do your best, and sometimes they'll be mad, but um, I remember in my MBA taking the HR class, and the prof was brilliant. And I remember him saying, when you let somebody go who's not doing a really good job, it's hard on you because you almost feel like you're condemning them to a life of unemployment. But in reality, you're not. I think the stat was 86% of people who had been let go in a job because they weren't performing well. They weren't happy, and the boss wasn't happy, and 86% of them a year later win a job that they were much happier with. So if it's not a fit, it's probably not a fit for you or them. But I mean, it's hard to let someone go still. But I know that most of the people that I let go that I've still kept in contact with, they're all doing really well. They're all really happy with what they're
And
doing.
you're the catalyst along the way for them getting into their zone of genius in a sense. And what you've identified is a cohesion to the organization from the leadership perspective that you're like, this is how we're going to do things around here.
Yeah.
I've got some understanding about how to do it. I've studied how to do it. I've led, I've done those things. And now you've had a chance to get to this win. And we hear some of the strategic highlights and some of the timeline highlights along the way. Funny enough, the third step for me is always looking at the people. You've been going on about that quite a bit. You have an A team in there now.
Yeah.
These are people who are intrinsically motivated for the work that they're doing. You hired them and onboarded them in a way where it's like, yeah, you're going to make a decent, good living, but how can you then take the ownership piece? What is it in you as a leader, in a sense, from your own internal attitude perspective, that set up those conditions?
Well, I'm gonna be candid with you that I'm not sure that I always did that as well as I thought. I learned more about myself, also doing this job. Hired great people, and they're all doing great work. But then sometimes I forgot, that people are still people, and so there'd be disagreements, and I'd be like, "Oh, you guys can work it out," but then they wouldn't work it out, and so then you kind of got to step in and help them work it out, and so um, it really takes a hands-on approach to constantly build that culture, move things along, and I think there were a couple of times over the last couple of years where I don't know if I necessarily felt overwhelmed or I was, already busy with a bunch of things, or I thought, I just don't know what to do. Like, how do I take two amazing people who can't quite see eye to eye on something and fix that? But I've learned, you learn to have those difficult conversations and it turned out, as I'm sometimes a little bit of a shy guy, and so it turns out that everybody is a whole lot happier after having those conversations, and that's an element of leadership I could have as an external person looking at a municipality or looking at a chamber and giving them advice, and it was easier being in the CEO role and managing that. That was an element I realized I wasn't quite comfortable with. I've learned it now, and hell, now I have to check myself regularly to make sure I'm not overdoing it. But I always say, I just used it yesterday morning. A strength over relied on becomes a weakness, and a weakness mastered becomes a new strength. And I that's always been my philosophy. And doing this job, I found a couple places where I had to identify, recognize the weaknesses, and turn them into strengths. So
How lucky that you have the humility and that you are open to the learning that you're going to get along the way, right? That just speaks to your own journey. It speaks, again, philosophically back to the book that you've written and the work that you've done along the way. And it sounds like that evolution will continue. I met Amir from Rotoflow. His episode's coming out soon. The guy simply invested in becoming a better leader in relatively a short period of time. Just stunning how much he invested, and the humility that it took for him to get to top a game is a remarkable story. You're just reminding me of that along the way. So thanks for that insight into you. There's always you can't do these things alone. How would you describe some of the other key people in getting this win, this chamber to get to this level at this point? Who are some of the key, and you don't need to necessarily name names, you can if you'd like, but who are some of the key people, and what were their sort of attitudes along the way as well?
um, yeah, how do I do that without naming names?
Or you can name the
Well,
names if you can. Yeah,
I'm
whatever.
gonna name
Yeah.
some names because the first person I want to identify would be Amin. He's the director of membership, and he is the only person with a tenure here longer than me. I did have to do quite a bit of letting people go, but Amin stuck around, and I don't know even know what it was. He just seemed to say, "Great, what you want to do? Let's talk about that. Let's see what we can do." And I know that a couple of decisions I made, he actually came by the office and he said, "What, what the hell are you doing?" And then I said, "You just have to trust me. Just trust me." And I know the biggest one that it was letting a certain person go before the chamber ball, who was running the chamber ball, and it was 2 weeks before that. And I said, "You just have to trust me," because he looked like he looked panicked. But I had already gone and found a wonderful person who had worked on the chamber ball before and worked out a deal so she could come back and help us pull this off. Like, I had only been in this role for a month and a half or 2 months. And as soon as Amin heard that, he's like, "Okay, okay, I see what you do." And he's had a lot of trust in me throughout it, and I think he's also like, I get the best compliment because we were crossing the street after having lunch together, and he just looked at me and he said, I feel reinvigorated. I haven't quite felt this energized since I've been at the chamber. And, that was the greatest compliment to me, to somebody who's been here for, I think, 7 years now, to have seen it doing really well, to watch, the decline, and then to watch it bounce back, and to be reinvigorated just was confirmation to me we're on the right path. And then there's, folks like Heather. I've worked with Heather on other stuff before. When I left politics, she brought me in to help teach some municipal affairs stuff at the university, and so we've worked together on stuff for so long. There's a long-standing trust there, and it alleviated a lot of stress from me, because I could just say, "You handle this," and we know what each other's thinking before we, you know, she half the time knows what I'm thinking before I know what I'm thinking, and vice versa. So it was helpful.
Well, and isn't this the case that if you're going to build a chamber and you're going to bring businesses together and be a voice that you folks are on the policy side to advocate for Edmonton and the region, if you're going to do that from a leadership perspective and things are not functional, you got that's that heavy lifting phase that you also had to go through to set the stage based on what was needed for this organization at this time, and how lucky then again to retain some organizational history through the memory of people like who were able to then go through maybe who's this guy, and then learning what that is, and then that pays forward for, in a sense, sticking to your own values as a leader, and making those things occur as a through line through all of this. And there would be dozens more people. Do you know what I mean? If we made the full stakeholder list, there would be so many that are supporters and this kind of thing, mentors. Any others, just so in case I don't leave this one without mentioning anybody?
Every single person who's at this Chamber of Commerce right now has been absolutely incredible, has given me great ideas. I mean, I just thanked Jordan, who does membership engagement, because at our all teams meetings when we're gathering, she had just, like, we had our one-on-one session, and she said, you know what, those all teams meetings, what if you took about 20 minutes at the end and just had everyone talk about their celebrations? What is their win? What is their big shiny moment that they've gotten over the last couple of weeks? And man, is it ever uplifted you? Now someone says, well, we sold, 39 memberships, and, that's a new record, and everyone applauds. And then someone goes, and guess what? Those 39 members were all done at the Four Ministers Health Symposium that we had, which we got great review, and everyone applauds. And you could just see the energy. So like your Wins podcast, we're doing that at our All Teams meeting. And every single person here has suggested some just incredible things. The business community's been fantastically supportive. I'm actually maybe a little bit tired of hearing how wonderful I'm doing and how wonderful the chamber is, because I know it, but everyone just has to comment that 2 years and the chamber is back, and it's been nice. So the patience, the support, people coming back to events, people coming back to sponsorship it's been remarkable. And the doors, of course, at the municipal, provincial, and federal level have all opened too. They recognize the value of the chamber, and they're excited to have us back and helping too.
And you're an economic driver. You're a big piece of that puzzle at a tough economic time in these crazy days of east, west, north, south, dollars here and there, and all the different things that are so dynamically happening. How nice that the foundational parts are in for what will be necessary lifting by the chamber and chamber voice and the strength of the chamber over these next years, as sort of it's a contribution to the local, provincial, and national story that gets told along the way, because you're mentioning the strength of how far you've built it. Well, we could go on and on about the people all day long, but thank you for mentioning some of the key players. But then again, of course, a big shout out to the other folks that maybe didn't get named, but they're there as a big part of it as well. Strategy, work plan, people, operationally. That's sort of the fourth step I like to look at and say, well, there's some operational components. I'm going to say onboarding as an operational component. Do you know what I mean? Any process improvement? You mentioned IT got fixed up, that kind of thing. Any other operational highlights that you'd like to point out for getting this win kind of to occur?
That was some of the biggest challenge. And I don't know if I can say it was a big win, because it's still ongoing. The policy manual, one of the biggest policies in there was that women couldn't wear leggings to work. It hadn't been updated in 50 or 60 or 70 years. So updating all of the policies and the processes in place. There were no policies in place on how to utilize AI, or there was a lot of gaps because things hadn't been updated in a long time. Because and most of this stuff had just evolved in the last while. So operationally, that's getting the pieces in place and knowing processes and protocols and stuff was some of the challenges, and we're still working on some of those. I don't know that we're done yet and that I can say it's a win, but it's in process. And of course, it's the most tedious part of any of it. You get the right people in place and you're ready to play the game, but those operational pieces are about the plays you make, who you pass the puck to, and who comes up the middle, and that's the practice. And so, it's been 2 years. We're still working on that. But I think that's one of those things that we will never stop working on.
Well, and it's funny because you're reminding me of many leaders that have been, I've over 50 leaders that have been on this show. I keep hearing 10 years and 20 years. So sorry to tire you out because you're in your first couple, but you know what I mean? We hear these and you bolt this piece in and then you get that going and then you do this and those things that lead to those things. And you're in the middle of kind of what that takes. Again, I can witness certainly attending events. The events are solid, better attended than I remember from many, many years ago. So that congratulations. So I can say operationally that part, witnessing it is working out. I've attended the Chamber Ball. It's obviously an outstanding A-class event, which is fantastic. And actually, a few of those people are going to be on the podcast. And that's really lucky to meet cool people that are going to be highlighted by you, but then getting a chance to get them to share their stories here. Strategy, work plan, people, operations, and talked a little bit about that. Finally, there's results. There's quantitative results and qualitative results. Quantitatively, let's talk about the membership roll call in a sense, or any quantitative that you want to point out. But what's the membership sort of growth rate since you've been there, and what's that look like?
You know what, when I first got here, I got a bit of resistance from some folks that aren't here about rebuilding the website and allowing people to be able to buy memberships on the website. They're like, you can't do that. They have to call us. But I pointed out that, 5 years ago, I called 3 times to the chamber to buy a membership and nobody called me back. So we went ahead with the changes. And we were about 1.2, depending on the month, 1.2 to 1.5 new members per day, which would be about a 25% growth, which is I couldn't believe it. But then we also found out that there were people who had been listed as members for 2, 3, 4, 5 years that hadn't paid dues, and some of their companies didn't even exist. So between cleaning up the old roles and bringing on new people, we've stayed about the same, around 2,000 members. Now that we've cleaned them up, I think we're going to see some pretty phenomenal growth. Our finances are back in place, and we're going to be running a balanced budget this year, a couple of years of investment to get things back. Those qualitative things, like sold out events, and our coffee with the chambers are now getting 500 and 600 people coming to them. And that's just unheard of before. So that's really remarkable. The last minute stuff, having the premier come and selling out 300 tickets, in 4 days, it just shows quantitatively how we're doing. But qualitatively, I'm going to say, to have cabinet ministers and the provincial government call us when there's an issue and ask if we have a perspective, if we can share some information, if we're interested in partnering. The regular meetings that we have now open doors all the time with all of our the city councillors and the city administration. We've met with just about all of them again since the last election. We meet with the mayor every month, and even the federal government. We have something coming up this year, and I can't say what it is, but it's going to be a pretty big event, and we're really excited to have the federal government and the Prime Minister's office interested in working with us on that. It's just, they even called for the Canada, U.S., Mexico free trade agreement and asked me to come to the standing committee on that to comment about the impact on businesses and what it means. So, we're participating at all 3 levels of government, and they're calling us to get our advice and help. And that is to me a really good qualitative measure about where we stand.
That's got to feel, just how does it feel? You just described, you just gave me the sort of the laundry list of everything, but how are you still standing or running away screaming, or what's going on?
No, I feel really good. In fact, it's a little It feels like it's gone by so fast because it was just a 3-year contract and it comes up in October. But I did give the board, an extension option if they want, and they just got it. So they're going to have a look at it. But I just can't believe how far we've come in just over 2 years. And yet it also feels like I just got here. It's been amazing to watch the transition. And I think probably one of the chamber will carry on whether I'm here or not. And the goal is to make sure, I think the number one rule of real leadership is succession planning and making sure that you have everything in place so that ideally, I'd love it if people looked at me and said, I didn't even know Doug was still there. You have such a great team. I see them everywhere, all over the place. I didn't even know you were still there. That's the way to leave and have real legacy. And I think every single person at this chamber is going to eventually be stolen to some companies because of the great things they're doing here and what the chamber is doing. And to me, those are great. Those are the legacies I want to leave.
That's the legacy you want to leave for sure. And maybe even a desk that isn't broken for the next guy in terms of...
This desk will be here for the next person. All taken care of.
Imagine that. And it's funny, I've done some work with Edmonton Global at the board level, Edmonton Global attracting direct foreign investment. When I think about pieces of the puzzle, when you're going to attract big things into the region, when you're going to export things from the region and talk about them, you've just been a cheerleader as a big piece of that puzzle. And so neat to get some of the insights into saying, not only are you doing it on the face of the events, but also this behind the scenes thing to be called in for opinions and have the reputation that's built up again to be able to do that. That's a significant driver again for the whole region. So that's just a remarkable, remarkable thing to hear. When I get great leaders on like you, I always like to say, if you had a few sentences for the next guy who's putting a desk together or whatever he's doing, what are a few sentences that you'd like to leave behind for leaders that might be listening to this podcast they can learn from?
Well, it's that, I don't remember the exact adage, but the Olympics just came and went. And, everyone stands up and cheers and celebrates when you get a gold medal or a silver or a bronze. Every single one of those athletes worked tirelessly and relentlessly. Even, we celebrate the gold medal, but no one knows about how many years of work, the 4 years of work that went on behind that, or even longer, to get to that spot to win that medal. So when you're sitting there putting your own desk together, using your own laptop and trying to figure out how you're going to stitch this together, just remember that this is what training is about. This is what hard work is about. And someday you'll be celebrated for having been to the Olympics, whether you win a medal or not. No one's going to cheer you on while you're trying to get there. That takes resilience, that takes courage, and that takes vision and perseverance to make sure that you can get through it. But it'll be worth it because the organization you create, the business you build, well, that's what the legacy is about.
That's what the legacy is about. From teacher to university professor, from teacher to politician, out of politician, recovering politician, into a leadership role, being in the middle of multi-levels of things, along with a chance to lead a great team. Doug, we could go on and on, but I just want to say thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, Gordon, thanks for having me on. This was a lot of fun, and this was a great conversation. I love your podcast, by the way.
Apply proven values and techniques. Build a team of rock stars and put in the work when nobody is looking. That is how Doug and his team win every day. Thank you, Doug, for your inspiring win. And if you enjoyed listening to this episode, then make sure to check out our upcoming episodes, which include how two brothers can successfully co-lead a family business, winning with Kevin Lapes and Jeffrey Lapes, owners of Pemco Construction. And if you're a leader who really wants to learn how the Executive Wins coaching session can help you to grow your confidence and inspire your team, then visit executivewins.com to learn how. You can also subscribe to the Executive Wins newsletter to stay up to date on the podcast, live events, education opportunities, and more. Visit executivewins.com/newsletter to sign up. And if you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe, and share it with a fellow leader. And don't forget to check out our resources and links in the show notes. And keep listening to the Executive Wins podcast for more inspiring wins that will help you to grow yourself, your team, and your entire business. Thanks for listening to the Executive Wins podcast. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe as we bring you more inspiring wins from outstanding leaders so you can grow your business.